except we'll back up and go to Numbers 13 just to begin with, in the last three verses, chapter 13, verse 31. The title of the lesson tonight is, Would God We Had Died in This Wilderness. And you'll see why that's the title as we get into it. But in Numbers 13 and verse 31, it says, But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched, and to the children of Israel, saying, The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there were the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured. So mark that word, because we're going to get some definitions of this later. Murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt. Now I'm going to assume that they were crying this out. And I'm not going to get too loud, but I'm going to get a little bit louder. I'm going to say, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? God heard them when they said that. All right, now, wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? Now again, I'm just reading this, but that's not the way they said this. They are, what's the right word? They're exclaiming, okay? They're probably shrieking. They're beside themselves, right? As they say these things. I mean, when you say something like, Would God we had died in the land of Egypt or in this wilderness, you're kind of at your wit's end. And then in verse 3, were it not better for us to return into Egypt? So they're at this point. And they said one to another, Let us make a captain and let us return to Egypt. And this is what we're seeing here is a mob mentality. And instead of people, having cooler heads, there's a it's like everything's out of hand. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. So let's stop there. So you know the saying, be careful what you wish for. This is their conclusion of God. And let me back up. I want us to understand, after everything God has done for them, this is their conclusion. This is where they've come to. This is their final synopsis of the God we serve. Okay? Because they got some bad news. It was really bad news from these 10 faithless spies. But their conclusion of God, after 10 plagues in Egypt, which they witnessed with their own eyes, God decimated that land. The miraculous Red Sea deliverance from Pharaoh, okay, this is their observation of God after seeing this. Manna every day provided their sustenance. Mount Sinai, vision of God and the lightning and the clouds and the thunder and all of the awesomeness that went with that. They witnessed all that, and then God gave them a covenant, which Moses brought down. And the receiving of this covenant, they get some bad news from some faithless leaders, and they say this, Would God we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? It's like they wish they was already dead. That's how. Now, I mean, they mean this. I mean, this is real to them. But I want to analyze. We're going to go through this chapter. I want to analyze these thoughts because in verse 3, they're totally focused on self. And this is the problem we can run into when trials come into our lives. We have a choice to focus on self or focus on the Lord. So here's some lessons for us, right? Focus on self or focus on the Lord. So in verse 3 they said, And wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey. Okay, God heard that too. And it says, Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? All right, now, so they're totally focused on self. They've forgotten God altogether at this point, all the miracles that he's done, because if you go back to chapter 13, and they get a negative report from the 10, there were 12 spies, but 10 of them were faithless. In fact, in verse number 4 through 15, their names are given. So the names of 10 faithless men are given and written down. Read verse 6 through 9. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. Now they're pleading with the people now. They're giving their side of the story. It's an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for their bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. See the difference? They're focused on the Lord, and the other whole part of the congregation is focused on self and circumstances. And we can all be in this camp at certain times of our life. I want to bring out a point here. The truth was, God was handing them a gift. I want us to kind of pause here for a moment. I want us to grasp the idea behind the land. And we've done some lessons on this in the past about the land and how important all that was. The people needed the law, and they also needed a land to live in, and God provided that for them. He had prepared it for them. But I want us to think about something. God was handing them a gift. What was the gift? It was the land. I mean, let's say there's 2 million people wandering around in the wilderness right now. They had no home. They're living in tents. They're living off manna and water. So, I mean, but they were being sustained. And so they wanted a land. They wanted homes. They wanted to plow ground. They wanted to raise their kids and have normal lives like everybody else. They didn't want to wander in the wilderness forever, which that's normal. But God's handing them a gift in chapter 13. But sometimes the gift God wraps for us is wrapped in a package that they felt or we feel is unacceptable. The fact was, God was gifting them the best land on earth. But what they didn't see is this. They didn't see the gift because they were looking at the package it was wrapped in. You see what I'm saying? I want us to kind of think about that tonight. Because sometimes in life, the best things that God has for us may not be easily attained. They may not be wrapped in, go here, go there, do this, do that, and it's all yours. Maybe God wants to test our faith, which is always the case. So, and he's doing that with these folks as well. Notice something in verse 7b. They said, this is Joshua and Caleb are, giving their side of the story. They says an exceeding good land. That's the package. That's the gift. It's an exceeding good land. If you go back to chapter 13 in the last part of verse 27, it says there, it floweth with milk and honey. Joshua and Caleb were spirit-led men dedicated to God and God's promises. When the going got tough, they didn't lay down on God, but the rest of them did. So we can learn from that, can't we? When the going got tough for this congregation, these men were still exercising faith. They were still ready to focus on the Lord. And we all know what that's like. We'll go through trials, testings, tribulations. Just the words themselves, right? Test means test. If you're at school and you're getting a test, you got to write down what's supposed to be in your head, and you're tested on your. And so tests are just that. They're not fun things to go through or to take. Let's go on. Let's look at verse 9 and 10. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. But all the congregation bade stone them with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. All right, so their message to the people is don't rebel and don't fear. Don't rebel and don't fear. And that's exactly what they were doing. Now, this is a mob mentality at its worst. They weren't just grumbling anymore. They were willing to destroy God's best men. They were going to murder these men. They were going to take them out, make them a captain, go back to Egypt. If they had done that, how well would that have worked out for them, do you think? I mean, think about this. How well, I mean, not really a good idea if you stop think about it. All right, so when we consider this now, this mob mentality, but something happens in verse number 10b. Notice in verse 10, it says, but all the congregation bade to stone them with stones. But notice this, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. Something happens. We recently studied the word glory in one of our lessons, and we kind of went into a lot of detail about it. And it just in a nutshell today, it means the full weight of who and what God is appeared and backed them down. You see that? The glory of the Lord appeared. And notice in verse number 10, the congregation bade stone them with stones. They weren't listening to what Joshua and Caleb had to say. And the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation, and they all saw it and witnessed it, and they could feel it. I don't know what this is like, but I would imagine that the glory of the Lord, the full weight of who he is and what he is, when he appears in that manner, it's going to back anybody down. And we notice something else here. We don't hear them speak the rest of this chapter until you get to verse 40. God takes center stage and begins to talk. Moses talks. It's God and Moses from here on out. Now, notice verse number 11 and 12. And the Lord said unto Moses, how long will this people provoke me, and how long will it be ere they believe me for all the signs which I've showed among them? And I will smite them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and will make of thee a greater nation and mightier than they. Now, do you remember verse 12? Do you remember reading verse 12? Look at that again. God said, I'll smite them with the pestilence, disinherit them, and will make of thee a greater nation and mightier than they. Make of thee. So he's saying, I can get rid of these people and start over with you. I'm willing to do that right now. That's how mad God was. He's willing to start over with Moses and disinherit these folks. Now, this shows God's not concerned with our timelines and plans when we fall into a state of rebellion, which Israel had just done. Now, God had made a covenant with them, but they broke it. God could honor his side, or he could not honor his side. We're going to see what he does in this chapter. And if it wasn't for Moses, God had already made his mind up. From what we're reading here, God had already made his mind up in verse number 12, the 3:13 through 20. Moses said unto the Lord, then the Egyptians shall hear it. Now Moses, I'm going to, none of these words are being spoken like I'm reading them. I mean, Moses is pleading with God. Then the Egyptians shall hear it, for thou broughtest up this people in thy might from among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. For they've heard that the Lord art among this people, and that thou art seen face to face, and that thy cloud standeth over them, and that thou goest before them day by daytime in a pillar of a cloud, and in a pillar of fire by night. Now if thou shalt kill all this people as one man, then the nations which have heard the fame of these will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land which he sware unto them, therefore he hath slain them in the wilderness. And now I beseech thee, let the power of my Lord be great, according as thou hast spoken, saying, the Lord is longsuffering, and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. Pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people according unto the greatness of thy mercy, and as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. And the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. God listened to Moses. But I want to look at a couple of things in this passage that Moses brings to God's attention. So let's think about something. God said in verse number 12, I'm willing to start over, disinherit them, and start over with you, and make of thee a greater nation and mightier than they. All right. But Moses says some things in verses 13 through 17. And I'm going to paraphrase this. He says the Egyptians will hear of it. And I'm going to ask you a question. Did God care about that? The Egyptians are going to hear about this. Did God care? The word will spread into Canaan. And they'll hear about this. Did God care about that? Is that going to affect God? That's my point. If these people hear about what God did, will that affect God? Will that change who he is? Will that make him any less God or any less powerful? He said he could start over and do it all over again if he wanted to. Next one. The nations will spread the word. The God of the Israelites was unable to bring this people into the land. Does God care about that? What did God... When Moses began to speak in verse 13 down through verse 20, what got God's attention is the question. Okay? Well, let's look at verse number 18 and 19. The Lord is long-suffering. Moses used the Hebrew word hesed. And this is such a beautiful word. I don't know Hebrew, but I do some word studies from time to time, and especially doing lessons. And the word hesed is translated into the word mercy much of the time. And he says in verse 18, the Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, hesed, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. Pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people, according unto the greatness of thy what? Mercy. And as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. He's reminding the Lord, you've forgiven them over and over and over and over again. I'm asking you to forgive them again. And so what he does is he appeals to God's mercy, hesed. I love that word. Now, hesed is one of the most important Hebrew words to describe God's mercy and character. It conveys steadfast love, covenant loyalty. Think about this now. Faithful kindness, loving kindness and mercy, a deep, reliable, active commitment rather than fleeting emotion. Now, the Israelites, they had that. Fleeting emotion. Things were going good. We serve a good God. Things ain't going so good. Let's go back to Egypt. Okay. Now, did you notice something about the definition? Steadfast love, covenant loyalty. You know, there's no one in existence more loyal than God. Think about this. The most loyal person to you on earth could be your spouse, more than likely. If you have a good spouse, that's a great thing. It could be a parent, it could be a child, it could be whatever. But the most loyal person that in existence is God himself. Now, the word hesed emphasizes God's unwavering loyalty to his promises and people. Even, notice, when they fail. You ever been there? Lord, I failed, and I need hesed. I need your mercy, see. And so Moses is appealing. Now, how did Moses know this was important to God? Go to Exodus chapter 34, and let's look at verse 5 through 7. Because I want us to see, you remember, we studied this recently, but on Mount Sinai, when, I think we studied this chapter whenever we were looking at the word kabod. I guess that's how you say it, the glory of the Lord. But in Exodus 34, verse 5, and it says, and the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. Now, again, okay, so he's on the mountain, and Moses asked to see God, and God allows it, and he stood there, and so God's proclaiming, as he goes by, he's passing by, and God's proclaiming the name of the Lord. In verse 6, and the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands. There's hesed again. Forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children unto the third and fourth generation. Does that sound familiar? Didn't we just read that in Numbers 14? Moses rehearsed this back to God. This same verse. It's almost verbatim in verse number 7. 6 and 7. All right, so Moses rehearses back. So let's go back to our, no, stay there just for a moment. I want you to notice something in verse, Exodus 36, and I got to get back there real quick. 34. I want you to notice what he says in verse number 6, the last part of verse 6. He says, abundant in goodness and truth. I think the word goodness there is the one that's hesed in that verse. Abundant in hesed. Abundant. Abundant. How would you like to have a spouse that you're married to that's abundant in mercy? Just so long-suffering, right? Just abundant. The abundance is just amazing how long-suffering and merciful my spouse is. I mean, we would all like to have that, but we probably all need to be that way too, right? Okay, so think about this. God's mercy is plentiful and abundant. God told Moses, this is who he is on Mount Sinai. He says, this is me. At Kadesh Barnea, Moses reminds God of this attribute. So now let's go back to Numbers 14 and look at verse 19. So Moses says, because of this, so he repeats there in verse number 18, basically the same thing we read in Exodus. In verse 19, Moses says, pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people, according unto the greatness of thy mercy, or hesed, the greatness of it, the bountifulness of it, the abundance of it. Lord, you've got more to spare than any person on earth. You've got all the mercy that there is, you see? Now, what's the lesson for us to learn from this tonight is that when we get in trouble, when we get maybe out of sorts with one another or with God, we can humble ourselves, number one. To do this, we got to, because God, he watches everything. He watches the heart and the spirit and all these things. But we got to humble ourselves before God. And Moses did this and plead the mercy of God and say, Lord, be merciful because you have an abundance of it. All right. Pardon according to the greatness of thy mercy. Go to Psalm 136 for a moment. The word hesed appears 26 times in this psalm. Psalm 136. And now that we know a little bit more about what this word means, this psalm might mean more to us. I'm not going to read it all, but let's read some of it. Psalm 136, verse 1. Give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his hesed, his mercy, endureth forever. Oh, give thanks unto the God of gods, for his mercy endureth forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his mercy endureth forever. To him who alone doeth great wonders, for his mercy endureth forever. Now, there's 26 verses and there's 26 times that this is mentioned in here. And I mean, in the past I've read through this verse and sometimes I would skip that last part. I would just read the first part because it gets over and over again, right? But should we do that? Because we're missing the point of this psalm is that God's mercy endureth forever. What a blessing that is to us sinners. All right. Hesed is not abstract. It involves deliverance, forgiveness, preservation, and redemption. It's an active word. Go back to Numbers 14 then, and let's look at verse 20 through 27. Numbers 14, verse 20. And we'll notice some more things about this story. In verse number 20 it says, and the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. You know, I want to ask you something, and I don't know the answer to this because it's conjecture. We don't know because we have to read it as it says. But if Moses hadn't asked God to do this, would he have on his own? I don't know. It looked like in verse 12 he'd made his mind up. But he listened to Moses, and he said, I have pardoned according to thy word. But as truly as I live, now he clarifies some things here. Notice now in verse number 21, he says, but as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. That's why I don't think he cared what the Canaanites thought or the Egyptians thought. He didn't care about what the wicked were thinking about him. That's not going to change who God is. He's still going to get his job done. But notice in verse number 22, because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, have tempted me now these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. Whoa. But my servant Caleb, because he hath another spirit in him, and hath followed me fully, him will I bring into the land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwelt in the valley. Tomorrow turn you and get you into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Now, did you notice that? Now, keep that in mind. I'm not going to read it, but you can go read it later if you want to. In the latter part of this chapter, the next day, they say, hey, let's go into Canaan now. Let's go anyway. And God said, he said here in verse 25, the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Turn around and get out of here. I'm not going to bless you if you try to go in. Well, they did, and they lost men. Verse number 26. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron and said, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation, which, here's the word, murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, which they murmur against me. All right, let's stop there. Now, what do you think the word murmur means? Just give me, some definitions off the top of your head. Quietly complaining. Quietly complaining. That's good. All right, what'd you say, Rye? Gossip about it? Okay, anybody else? Grumbling? Okay. All good definitions. Anybody else? What did you say? Quietly complaining. Okay. To murmur. So, all right, I agree with that. In our English definition, we would tend to think that murmuring is it's kind of like a child being told no and they walk away mumbling under their voice, blah 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 blah, right? No, you can't have that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't go there. And they walk away with their head down, and they're doing one of these things, and they're saying things to themselves, but they don't want you to hear it, and we think that's murmuring, right? There's more to it than that. It's part of it, all right? But to murmur in the Hebrew means to stop or to be obstinate and complain. So that's worse than we thought, actually. It's worse. To murmur is to be obstinate. And that's basically to say, I'm digging my heels in and I ain't going no further. We've maybe had our kids do that, right? That's when the rod of correction comes out. Okay, so murmuring involves action or the lack of it more than just words. Think about this now, to be obstinate. When a child digs in their heel, you ever see someone dragging their child through the grocery store and their kids are digging their heels into the concrete or whatever and they don't want to go and they're refusing to mind? That's obstinance. That's what murmuring is. It's when we say, Lord, I'm complaining, but I ain't going to do it. Does that sound like what Israel was right here? That's what they said. Lord, I don't like it, and I ain't going to do it. We're not going in. What'd they say in verse number 2? Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt. Would God we had died in this wilderness. Now remember, God had gift wrapped a gift for them, and it's called the land of Canaan. It was gift wrapped in something they didn't like. And sometimes God does things that way to test our faith. Okay? Now, let's go into verse number 28 through 31. Let's see here. Say unto them, as truly as I live. Who's still speaking here? The Lord. As truly as I live, saith the Lord, as ye have spoken in mine ears, he heard it, so will I do to you. As ye have spoken in mine ears, so will I do to you. So, the old adage, be careful what you say. Someone might hear it. Be careful what you wish for. God says, as ye have spoken in mine ears, so will I do it. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness. And all that were numbered of you according to your whole number from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured, remember, obstinate, said, no, I'm not going to do it, against me, doubtless ye shall not come into the land, concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, them will I bring in. And they shall know the land, which, what? Ye have despised. The gift was the land. What'd they do? They despised it. Why? Because it was gift wrapped in something they didn't like. Now guess what? If you read further on in the book of Joshua, they actually go into the land and conquer every single nation that God said they could conquer. They do it anyway, the next generation. God's very patient. If we won't do it, he'll raise up someone who will. See it all the time. All right. They got what they asked for. They said in verse 2, would God we died in the wilderness? He says in verse number 28, as ye have spoken in my ears, so will I do to you. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness. They wanted to die in the wilderness, so God let them. Verse 32 says, but as for you, your carcasses, they shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms, until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. After the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years. And ye shall know my breach of promise. I, the Lord, have said, I will surely do it unto all this evil congregation that are gathered together against me. Notice that? When they gathered together against Moses and Caleb and Joshua, they in effect had gathered themselves against God Almighty. He took it very personal. And he says, what verse am I in? 35. If I, the Lord, have said, I will surely do unto all this evil congregation that are gathered together against me in this wilderness, they shall be consumed, and there they shall die. And the men which Moses sent to search the land, who returned and made all the congregation to murmur against him by bringing up a slander upon the land, even those men that did bring up the evil report upon the land died by the plague. What does it say? Before the Lord. They died that day, according to this. So they didn't realize when they went into the promised land it was a test. Wow. You know, we got to be careful, don't we? I mean, it pays for us to stay in a humble position before the Lord. God hears everything we say. He knows every thought in our head. And he's very gracious and patient and loving, kind. He knows what he knows. He said, Psalmist David said, remember my frame, that I am dust. And I'm thankful God does. Because if it wasn't for God's mercy, we would all be consumed, I think. Because none of us are really fit for much in the flesh. You know, we're really not. It's what God has done through us, and which in Christ and the Spirit that lives in us, that's worth something. So the last thought is this. The land, in verse number 31, which you have despised, that word despise means to reject, spurn, refuse, or treat as worthless and abhor. Wow. I mean, think about this. The greatest gift God had for his people was the land. Now, he gift wrapped it in warfare. They had to go a-warring after to get it. They had to subdue it. They had to conquer. God just didn't hand it to them, but he did send great hailstones, and he helped them in lots of different ways, and he brought them through on the Jordan River on dry ground, if I remember right. He did help them mightily, but he asked them to keep stepping forward in faith. And see, that's the key. If we can learn something from this lesson, let's learn this tonight. And that is that we don't have to always know. We want to know. We want to know, 5 months down the road, a year down the road. We want to know. But what God requires of us is the next step. You see? That's how we live the life of faith. It's that next step. What are we going to do tonight? What are we going to do tomorrow? You see, we got to live life one moment, one day at a time. So that's how we exercise faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. If they had just exercised faith and kept their heads and listened to Caleb and Joshua and said, you know what? These guys, they've got a bad story, but we serve a great God. We serve a great God, and look at what all he's done for us all these last several years. I mean, in all this wandering and how we come out of Egypt and on the Red Sea and all. If they had begun to rehearse, see, we forget too easily. We forget what God has done for us in the past, don't we? We got short-term memories with God. And we want to think God can't do nothing right now, but looking back in our past and all of the miracles that he's wrought in our life and all of the prayers that he's answered and all of the needs that he's provided for. I don't enjoy living the life of faith like anybody else does. It's a constant battle, but it's something God requires of us as his children. That's how he gets honor and glory out of his people, because no one else on earth does that. Everyone else lives by sight. We're the only people on earth that lives by faith. And that's why we're his people. The land was God's personal gift to his people, but it wasn't wrapped in a package that suited them, so they despised the gift. So, I think that's good enough for tonight. We've learned a lot from old Israelites. They had a lot of problems, didn't they? But God wrote a lot of that down for us to learn from so that we can avoid some of those mistakes that they did as well.